Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mafia and Gangsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue the wonderful book, Super Mafia, Organized Crime Threatens America by Jonathan Harris. In this case, continuing chapter 3, but part 2, with the theme or the topic of the chapter being tidal wave of drugs. So we just featured on part 1 some information about how these drugs are basically going into the mafia. The taboo that's associated with them is apparently false. They're openly being accepted by the mafia as long as, of course, they get their cut. So this part 2 will continue that theme as well, and then we'll get to see some more information about how the mafia was able to use some other international locations to smuggle in these set of drugs. Who knew? This kind of stuff as far as drugs was not as taboo as one thought. So the next segment is called the Latin America Mafia, and then here's what it says. For all of its money and power, the mafia has been unable to win control over two of the biggest moneymakers in the drug marketplace. They are marijuana and cocaine. And they are controlled by the Cubans and the Colombians, with some small share given over to the Bolivians. Early in the early 1970s, the traffic in these drugs was run exclusively by Cuban exiles in the United States. Then substantial numbers of Colombians emigrated here. They proved to have superior organizing skills, along with a greater willingness to use extreme violence to get what they wanted. By the end of the decade, 5 Colombian families dominated the pot and coke importing business. The Cubans worked with them, but they were no longer on top. The mafia attempted to muscle in on several occasions during those years. It even financed some of the Colombians' operations. Its takeover effects failed. The mafia has succeeded only in taking a cut of the pot and coke money by channeling the Latin American group's imports through its nationwide distribution networks. The profits at stake in this competition are measured in the tens of billions of dollars. According to William V. Roth Jr., chairman of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, he says, drug smuggling is the fastest growing industry in Florida. It is an industry wealthy enough to buy huge blocks of land for airstrips, warehouses, sophisticated aircraft, some of the latest boats afloat. It is so lucrative that traffickers can afford to sink vessels to avoid capture and to abandon planes and vehicles once they have been used. One pilot for the smugglers has made 11 flights from Colombia to the United States. He was flying large 4-engine planes. At no time were these flights ever picked up on the radar scopes manned by American Defense Forces all along the Florida coast. Whether this failure represented a real weakness in our defense system or some form of corruption has never been cleared up. An ABC TV special called The Cocaine Cartel traced the illicit dollars gained in this traffic from banks in New York, Miami, and Panama to Bogota, Colombia. There, the money is laundered and returned to the United States for perfectly legal investment. The Latin American smugglers are often called the cocaine cowboys because of their wild tendency to uncontrolled violence. A Florida sheriff has described their mode of operations. When they go out on a hit, they kill the mother, the father, the children, anybody who's around. They go in this and with guns blazing. This description was not exaggerated. A 32-year-old Colombian coke dealer named Orlando Galvez, his 29-year-old wife, their 18-month-old daughter, and their 4-month-old son were driving on a Long Island parkway in their new Mercedes. Suddenly, another car pulled alongside. The men inside loosed a hail of bullets into the Galvez car. The entire family was wiped out. The police found an arsenal of weapons, 140 pounds of cocaine, and almost $1 million in cash in the family's apartment. The exact reason for the killings has never been ascertained, nor have the killers been identified, but the police were certain it was a typical Colombian hit. The mafia is not known for being tender-hearted about violence. Nevertheless, it seems to have decided to leave the pot and coke smuggling trade to the Latin Americans. Next segment is called Motorcycle Gangs and Mafiosi. Looming up as a sinister new factor in the drug scene are the outlaw motorcycle gangs. These violent groups have proliferated throughout the United States over the past 2 decades. According to federal law enforcement officials, among the approximately 800 biker clubs involved in illegal activities, the Big Four are dominant: Hells Angels, Outlaws, Pagans, and Bandidos. Long acting in drug abuse and dealing, they were at first dependent on mob connections for their supply, but as early as 1966, the Hells Angels in California decided to strike out on their own. They went into the manufacture and distribution of methamphetamine pills, popularly known as speed or crank. They have organized it into a very big business indeed. According to a recent confidential report by the Drug Enforcement Administration, the biker gangs are believed to control the entire methamphetamine market. Nationwide, they could be in control of up to 60% of the illicit methamphetamine distribution system. Profits now run into the multi-million-dollar level. The bikes are also deeply into distribution of the hard drugs, mainly heroin and cocaine, but for these they remain dependent mainly on the mafia. Next segment is called Ways and Means. Mafia drug operations are exclusively high level. The mob finances much of the large scale traffic and oversees distribution at the wholesale level only. No self respecting mafioso would ever be found on the street peddling dope directly to addicts or even to the pushers who sell to the addicts. By a formal decision reached at the infamous 1957 meeting of the Mafia's top brass in Appalachian, New York, such low-level jobs are assigned to non-mafia types, mainly blacks and Hispanics. Some of the mobsters' most creative efforts go into the unending search for new ways to slip the stuff through the security system guarding the nation's borders. Recent shipments from Italy and Sicily have been discovered in cans of anchovies, inside oranges, sewn into blankets, in the high heels of women's shoes, in dried fish, even secreted inside huge blocks of marble. U.S. Customs agents in New York recently captured a consignment of over 100 pounds of heroin that had received special attention. The smack had first been wrapped in plastic and tinfoil, then it was packed into steel containers sealed with wax in order to defeat the sniffer dogs specially trained to detect narcotics. The steel containers were finally hidden inside shiny new brass espresso coffee machines. The drugs' street value was figured at some $184 million, making this the biggest heroin bust since the French Connection days of the early 1970s. Sometimes, if a willing courier can be found who has no police record and seems unlikely to arouse suspicion, the drugs will simply be stashed in his luggage or even on his person. A single successful trip can net a courier a cool $10,000. And then the next segment is called Newest Menace, the Drug in Sports. Another very important aspect of the drug problem has only begun to come under serious investigation. As authorities deeply concerned, it is the spreading threat of drug abuse by sports figures. The potential for corruption by mob gambling interests is boundless. Sports insiders have been aware of this danger for some time, but it first burst onto the public consciousness in the summer of 1982. Don Reese, formerly a star defensive lineman in the National Football League, wrote a sensational article in Sports Illustrated. He asserted that cocaine now controls and corrupts pro football and can be found in quantity throughout the NFL. Soon afterward, Charles S. Jackson, Assistant Director of Security for the NFL, told the New York Times that as many as 40 or 50 players might actually be dependent on cocaine, with hundreds of others using it, many of them regularly. He added that there was absolutely no evidence thus far that gamblers have used coke to corrupt any players yet. Still, the longer the problem of cocaine continues to grow, the greater the chances of it occurring. Tony Vaccarino, the FBI's national coordinator for gambling and sports bribery investigations, suspects that the worst has already happened. He says there is a strong likelihood that use of drugs to bribe athletes does exist. It can easily be done. We know many big-time athletes are involved on a very large scale in using cocaine. All illegal sports bookmakers will attempt to use any means possible to obtain any kind of advantage. let's go ahead and let's pause it here. And then this will be part 2 of chapter 3 from the book Super Mafia, Organized Crime Threatens America, the theme being tidal wave of drugs. The next part will actually wrap up the entire chapter all together. So let's talk about this here. So as you can see, it's almost like it's a tidal wave that's perfect when it comes to the title of these drugs. That's trying to hold it back. How do you hold a tidal wave back? You can't. You simply try to control it as much as you can, but eventually some of it or all of it will go through. And such is the case here with these drugs. I just saw, by strange coincidence, a video on YouTube, and within it, it showcases there in Nicaragua, if I'm not mistaken, or was it Panama? One of those two. In any case, it showcases the shipments that are going through the ports. These are those giant containers, those metal containers that stack up like almost like skyscrapers. And it showcases how futile the attempt is to stop drugs, because all those containers, all of them, could have some drugs in them. But in order to make sure that they do or don't, you would basically have to open up every single container and then examine every single content. It showed what it took to be able to just do one. Like, they basically have to open it, then they have to get those machines that carry crates out of the containers. Then they have to open up each box individually. Like, each container has hundreds of boxes, and then they have to comb through each of those boxes to see if there's any chance of even one of them having something resembling drugs. Imagine that times tens of thousands of these containers, these large containers, all passing through on a daily basis through that port. There's no chance whatsoever. And unfortunately, the mafioso know that too. You read that story too, that there's a lot of fraud associated with it, though. That family associated, the Orlando Galvez family, how they were shot down. I'm pretty sure that the area there was probably knowing that something that they were doing was wrong, because how does a family, looks like, or it sounds like, fresh from Colombia, all of a sudden have a brand new Mercedes and a nice apartment, and then have over $1 million in cash and so on? So I'm pretty sure they were being followed somehow. And when that happened, that's where, unfortunately, they met their demise. Obviously, you want justice to be done when it comes to this stuff, but not like that. No, absolutely not. So in that case, that entire family, unfortunately, got wiped out. It just shows the risks associated with doing these type of drugs, or following this kind of lifestyle. Somebody nefarious was making sure that they weren't going to do that anymore. And then, interesting about the motorcycle gangs as well, I did not know that part. There they are, apparently having a market as well when it comes to drugs. Like, they help supply and they help create the channels associated from the mafia to be able to portion out those heroin and cocaine distributions. Drugs make strange bedfellows, as the saying goes on there. But otherwise, that's it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.